There were nights when the world taught a brutal arithmetic. One life taken, one name erased, one woman turned into a bargaining chip before dawn. Serafina had grown up hearing that pacts survived through loyalty and blood, through old laws and older gods, through the sacred duty to shelter their own. In the space of 2 days, every one of those promises had split open like rotten timber. The men who swore protection had measured her worth against convenience and found her expendable. The men who hunted power had measured her grief and found it useful. Only the child beneath her heart remained unquestionable, a quiet, stubborn future pressing against a present built on betrayal. Rain soaked through the torn hem of her dress as she stumbled along the border road, one hand clamped over her belly, the other gripping the knife her husband had pressed into her palm the week before. It was a practical blade, plain steel, the handle worn smooth by his thumb. There was blood on her sleeve that was no longer warm. Each breath cut deep, dragging smoke and wet pine through lungs already raw from running. The ambush had happened before moonrise, fast and disciplined, too precise to be bandits. Her husband had shoved her behind the overturned cart and shouted one command, the only one she obeyed without question. Run. She had run while wolves snarled in the dark, and men shouted border calls she recognized from Frostborn patrols. She had run while the bond she once trusted as marriage snapped into silence so abruptly she nearly turned back and died for it. She had run until the road vanished under stormwater and she was no longer a wife, only a target with a child and a ring she could not bring herself to remove. By dawn, she reached the stone markers of her birth pack, the place she had told herself would still claim her if everything else failed. The old oak gate stood open. Torches burned in iron brackets despite the rain, turning the carved sigils slick and black. 2 sentries blocked her path with crossed spears, their expressions hardening when they saw her dress, her face, her swollen stomach. "Please," she said, voice ragged. "I need sanctuary. Frostborn riders are on the road. My husband is dead." One sentry looked at the other before answering, almost apologetic in tone and utterly unmoved. "The Alpha is in council. You are not expected." "I am not asking for ceremony. I am asking for shelter." The second guard's nostrils flared. "You carry trouble. Everyone knows what happened at your last moon trial. No shift for 6 months, no wolf call, no scent flare. The elders named it already. Cursed." The word did not need to be spoken. It sat between them anyway, cold and familiar. She forced herself upright. "I lost my shift after conception. It is temporary." The healer said. "The healer is gone." The first guard cut in, "and we are under truce pressure. Frostborn has been probing the southern line for weeks. We do not invite war to our gate for one widow." The gatehouse door opened then, and Alpha Darius stepped onto the threshold with his mate at his shoulder, both dry under heavy cloaks, while rain ran in rivulets down Serafina's neck. Darius did not descend the steps. He spoke from above, voice carrying the measured authority of a man who had practiced righteous disappointment for years. "You should not have come here. Where else was I meant to go?" she asked. "Anywhere your mate's family can afford to hide you." "He has no family left?" Darius's gaze dropped to her belly and returned to her face with calculated distance. "Your condition has already brought enough unrest. If Frostborn wants a widow tied to border inheritance, let them take the dispute through proper channels." His mate Leora added softly, as if kindness could soften cruelty. "You are unstable. Your wolf is absent. The pack cannot absorb that risk." Serafina stared at them, rainwater and tears blurring their outlines into one indifferent shape. "I was born under this roof." Darius's jaw tightened. "Then remember our laws and do not force me to break them for you." The gate shut in her face with a final iron clang that traveled through her bones. She found temporary shelter 2 valleys west in an abandoned hunter's cabin used by traders during thaw season. The roof leaked, the hearth smoked. She slept in her wet clothes, knife against her chest, waking at every cracking branch. Hunger sharpened everything, the smell of mold in the walls, the ache in her lower back, the tremor in her hands when she tried to thread a needle through torn fabric. By the second night, the storm worsened, wind hurling rain against the shutters hard enough to rattle nails loose. She crouched by the hearth and tried to count breaths the way old healer Mara had taught her when panic made her vision narrow. In through the nose. Hold. Out slowly. I am still here. I am breathing. My body is not failing me. The child is safe because I am moving, because I am thinking, because I am not on that road anymore. I will not lie down in fear and wait for men to decide what I am worth. I have lost a husband, not my mind. I have lost a home, not my right to live. If they call me cursed, let them. If they call me weak, let them choke on it later. One more breath, one more hour, one more step until I find a wall that opens instead of closing. The pounding on the outer door came just past midnight. Not a traveler's knock. 3 hard strikes, a pause, then 2. Military rhythm. She froze. Another strike split the silence, then a man's voice, muffled by rain. Sanctuary check. Open by order of Border Command. No insignia, no name, no pack call. Serafina backed away from the hearth, every instinct needle-sharp. Through a crack in the shutter, she caught movement beyond the rain, shadows in cloaks, too many for a routine check, horses held back off the path to muffle sound. Frostborn. The next moment the smell hit first. Oil. Fire licked beneath the door, thin at first, then greedy. Smoke poured along the floorboards and climbed fast, thick and bitter. She wrapped a wool blanket over her head, kicked the back window twice until the warped frame splintered, and dragged herself through jagged wood into mud and thorn bush. Heat slapped her back as the roof caught. Men shouted on the other side of the blaze, swearing at the sudden collapse, arguing over whether she had made it out. She crawled until brush hit her, chest heaving, then rose and ran bent low through black pines while sparks drifted up behind her like furious stars. At dawn, she circled back from the ridgeline, keeping distance, needing proof of what she already knew. The cabin was a charred skeleton. The door still stood, half burned, and at its center a knife had pinned a signet ring into the wood. Her husband's signet. Crest scorched but visible. A message, not a memorial. We can reach you anywhere. Her knees gave for one terrifying second, not from injury, but from the force of grief striking in a fresh place. Then anger steadied her spine. They had staged the ambush, tracked her across 2 territories, and lit a house around her body while men who once called her sister bartered roots and silence for a few weeks of borrowed peace. This was no longer about surviving until Mercy appeared. Mercy had filed for absence. She turned north toward the mountains that marked wildfire lands, where stone keeps clung to cliffs, and their alpha was said to be as cold as the glaciers above his territory. Nikolai Wildfire did not offer favors. Nikolai Wildfire did not forgive trespass. Nikolai Wildfire, according to every warning whispered in lower valleys, solved problems with decisive force and slept well afterward. Good, she thought. Let him be ruthless. Ruthless men understood enemies better than cowards did. The climb into wildfire territory took the rest of the day and half the night. The trail narrowed to slick switchbacks carved into slate, with ravens circling below and cloud banks swallowing the moon whole. By the time the outer watchtowers came into view, her boots were split at the seams, her palms torn from catching herself on rock, and every muscle from hips to shoulders pulsed with exhausted pain. Snowmelt streamed down the cliff face in silver threads. Torches burned in shielded sconces along a tunnel cut through black stone, the main gate recessed deep enough to trap invaders in a narrow throat. A horn sounded once from above. Shadows moved along battlements. Arrows knocked. "Halt!" a voice called. "Name and allegiance." Seraphina stopped because her legs refused another step anyway. Seraphina of Ash Hollow by birth, mated into Eastmarch by oath. Widow, seeking guest right under wildfire law. A second guard leaned over the parapet, wolf scent heavy in the cold air. "State your purpose." "To live long enough to speak before your alpha." Silence followed, filled only by wind and the frantic beat of her own pulse. Then the inner portcullis rose with a grinding clatter, and two armored guards approached with cautious precision, neither lowering his weapon. They flanked her through the gate tunnel where torchlight painted the wet stone in bands of amber and shadow. The enclosed space amplified every sound. Metal against leather, distant water, her uneven breathing. At the far end of the tunnel stood a man in a dark coat lined with winter fur, broad-shouldered and still as carved granite. No crown, no ceremony. Authority sat on him anyway, unmistakable as mountain weather. His hair was black with a single pale streak at the temple. A scar traced the line of his jaw. When he looked up from the map case in his hands, the guard straightened as if pulled by string. Nikolai Wildfire. Seraphina had prepared for interrogation, suspicion, perhaps immediate confinement. She had not prepared for the shock that struck the instant the air shifted between them. Heat pulsed beneath her skin, sudden and fierce, rising from spine to throat. A pressure gathered behind her ribs, bright and silver and utterly unlike fear. The child moved once, sharply, as if answering a call she could not hear with human ears. Nikolai's head turned toward her fully. His pupils narrowed, then widened. Amber bled through the dark of his irises in a slow, impossible tide, the predator surfacing without a single change in posture. Around them, the guards stiffened, glancing at one another as a palpable wave of dominance rolled down the tunnel, not aimed at her, but around her, a territorial perimeter drawn in pure instinct. Seraphina's ring felt suddenly heavy on her finger. Grief, guilt, hunger, relief, terror, and a fierce, unfamiliar recognition collided so hard her knees threatened to fold. "Home," whispered a part of her she did not trust yet. Nikolai took one step forward, voice low enough that only she heard it. "Who did this to you?" Seraphina swallowed against the taste of smoke that still seemed lodged in her throat, and forced her voice to stay level. "Cain Frostborn. His riders set the ambush on the border road. They burned the safe house after my birth pack turned me away." Nikolai's expression did not change, but a sharp intake of breath cut through the tunnel's hush. The map case in his hand creaked under tightening fingers. Amber deepened in his gaze until it looked lit from behind, as though banked fire had been fed air. She felt the same instant as a heat wave under her skin, a live current moving through muscles that had been numb with fatigue an hour ago. Her instincts sharpened so abruptly she could hear water dripping from the tunnel arch and the minute shift of boot leather from each guard. Even the torch smoke smelled layered now, resin and iron and whetstone and him. Cold cedar over storm wind, unfamiliar, and already branded somewhere too deep to name. She had stood beside alphas before. She knew dominance, knew the pressure of command, knew the way power could be used like a hand at the back of your neck. What spread from Nikolai was different. It was feral, yes, and territorial in a way that made two armored wolves in full guard stance drop their eyes without being told. But it was arced around her rather than pressed against her. The distinction was non-trivial. Her body recognized it first, and traitorous relief followed before her mind could veto it. "I am exhausted. I am grieving. I am wearing my husband's ring and carrying his child. I do not get to feel this pull now." Not now. Not here. Not with strangers watching me like an omen. But the bond is there, bright as a wire under my ribs. I can deny a lot of things, and I have, to survive, but I cannot deny what my bones are shouting. He is danger. He is shelter. He is both at once, and I do not know what to do with that except stand still and keep breathing. Nikolai stepped closer, one deliberate pace, and stopped well outside arm's reach. Are you wounded? Not by steel. Her hand moved reflexively over her belly. Smoke and bruises. His attention flicked to the gesture, then returned to her face. How far along? 6 months. Something ancient looked out through his eyes for a heartbeat, then discipline slid over it like armor. He turned his head slightly. Captain Riven, clear this tunnel. No one approaches without my leave. The captain hesitated for less than a second. Alpha. The night watch rotation. Now. Boots rang against stone as guards withdrew. The tunnel emptied with military efficiency, leaving only Nikolai, Serafina, and one older woman in healer's gray, who had appeared so quietly, Serafina had not heard her descend the side stair. Nikolai inclined his head toward the healer. Maeve will examine you if you consent. You will be housed in the east, keep under guest right. No one enters your rooms without permission. Consent. Permission. The words landed harder than they should have. Serafina tightened her grip on the knife still in her hand. Why? His mouth hardened at the single syllable, as if he understood precisely what she meant. Why help me? Why protect me? Why now, when everyone else had calculated me as cost? Because you asked for sanctuary on my threshold, he said. Because my law is not decorative, and because Cain Frostborn does not hunt people across 3 territories unless he is trying to erase a witness. She stared at him, waiting for the second blade in the sentence. The demand, the leverage, the price. It did not come. Nikolai's gaze dropped once to the knife and then to her torn palms. You can keep that in my keep, he added, voice lower. No one will take it from you. The tight knot behind her ribs loosened by a fraction she could not afford, and she hated the grateful sting behind her eyes for it. Maeve approached with open hands and workmanlike calm. May I? Serafina nodded. The examination was quick and practical in a side chamber warmed by braziers, with Nikolai remaining at the doorway, body turned half away to give privacy while still maintaining line of sight to the corridor. No hovering. No claiming touch. No performative concern. Maeve checked pulse, pupils, smoke damage, then set 2 fingers gently against Serafina's wrist and smiled, faint and sure. Strong heartbeat for both, the healer said. Nikolai's shoulders lowered by an inch. Serafina noticed and wished she had not. By the time she was escorted through the keep, rain had shifted into a full mountain storm. Wind struck arrow slits with a low howl. Thunder rolled close enough to vibrate in the stone underfoot. Servants moved aside quickly, curiosity scented on them even when their eyes remained lowered. Serafina walked with her spine straight and her chin up, each step an argument against collapse. Her rooms were not luxurious, but they were secure. Thick walls, one high window, a bed with clean wool blankets, a table, a fire already laid. She crossed the threshold and turned to find Nikolai still at the door, hands empty and visible. You are safe tonight, he said. No one had spoken those words to her since before the ambush. The simple certainty in them split open a fresh seam of pain and yearning so sudden she almost reached for him, which frightened her more than any sword. I do not need gentling, she said instead, harsher than intended. He accepted the strike without flinching. Then I will not offer it. A near smile touched one corner of his mouth, brief as lightning. I will offer information. Frostborn scouts were seen 2 ridges south at dusk. They did not cross our markers. They will not. Because of your borders? Because of me. He said it without arrogance, as plain fact, and for the first time since the gate shut in her face at Ash Hollow, Serafina believed the road behind her had finally ended. The storm worsened after midnight. Thunder cracked directly overhead, and the sound pulled her from shallow sleep into a body memory so complete it stole language. She was back by the overturned cart, smoke in her lungs, wolves in the trees, her husband shouting run with blood on his teeth, and fear in his eyes he had tried to hide from her. The room tilted. Her pulse jumped into her throat. The air became too thin to swallow. She sat up too fast, room spinning, fingers clawing at blankets as if fabric could anchor her to the present. A servant had left a lamp burning low. Its flame threw moving shadows on the wall that became riders, fire, a burning door. She made for the chair and did not reach it before her knees hit the rug. No, she told herself, but the thought scattered. I am here. I am here. I am... A knock sounded once, then the door opened a hand's width. Nikolai's voice came through the gap, measured and quiet. Serafina. May I enter? She could not form a sentence. She managed a jerking nod he might not have seen, but he waited anyway until she dragged in one raw breath and rasped. Yes. He came in alone, closed the door with care, and stopped 2 paces away. His hair was damp as if he had walked the ramparts in rain. He had no weapons visible, no cloak, only dark shirt sleeves rolled to forearms marked with faint runes that pulsed once and faded. Look at me, he said. She did, because command was easier to follow than drowning. Her hands shook violently. He lowered himself to one knee so his eyes were level with hers where she knelt on the floor, then extended his palms upward, waiting. May I? Another nod. He enclosed her trembling hands between his, warm and steady, not gripping, simply containing. Breathe with me. 4 counts in, hold 2, 6 out. She tried and failed on the second count, panic spiking higher. He did not tell her to calm down, did not lie and say it would pass quickly. He counted again, voice deep and unhurried, each number a rung on a ladder. Good. Again. The storm hammered the window. Thunder rolled. His thumbs moved once over her knuckles in a small grounding pattern, left, right, left, and she matched it without realizing until her breath started to lengthen. 10 cycles. 15. The shaking eased from violent to manageable. Her vision cleared enough to see the strain around his eyes, the way he was holding his own instincts in a tight leash, because scent and panic and bond made the room feel charged to breaking. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded scraped clean. You could have sent a healer. I did, he said. Maeve is with an injured sentry on the south tower. So you came yourself? Yes. Why? He held her gaze. Because fear in this state can trigger labor. Because you trusted this room enough to sleep. Because I heard you through stone. The admission struck her silent. It was not boast. It was his reality, his senses tuned to a range she did not understand while unshifted. He released one hand, reached to the table, and passed her a cup of water he must have poured before kneeling. Her fingers brushed his. A low thrum built in her chest, immediate and disorienting, and she pulled back too quickly, sloshing water over her wrist. Sorry. For water? A ghost of dry humor touched his voice. 30 heartbeats of something almost ordinary. We can survive the scandal. Against all reason, a short breath of laughter escaped her, rough and startled. The sound seemed to ease something in him. He rose only when she could sit without swaying. Try to sleep again, he said. I will have the corridor cleared. She frowned. There are always guards in corridors. Not tonight. You cannot stand watch outside my door until dawn, Alpha. Watch me. He left before she could answer, and when she woke an hour later from a dream that did not involve fire, she found the hallway silent. At first light, she stepped out and saw his war maps spread across the stone floor of the adjoining strategy room, weighted with daggers and inkpots, as if he had relocated an entire night of command work away from his own desk so she could have the only high-backed chair in the suite and a wall she could lean against while breathing through aftershocks. No one had ever moved power out of her way. They had moved her instead. By midday, the keep had shifted from storm rhythm to political tension. Messengers arrived, mud-splattered and tight-lipped. Runners crossed courtyards at speed. Seraphina had just finished bread and broth when Captain Riven appeared at her door with formal stiffness. "The council requests your presence." "Requests?" "Heavy emphasis on the word from certain elders," he said. The Alpha's emphasis differed. The council chamber occupied the inner ring above the main hall, circular and windowless, its ceiling supported by carved pillars showing old lineages and older wars. When Seraphina entered, conversations thinned to silence. 9 elders sat along the curve of stone benches. Nikolai stood at the central table reviewing 3 sealed letters. He looked up once and motioned to the chair at his right. Not behind him, beside him. A ripple went through the room, subtle and sharp. Elder Varric, white-haired and hawk-nosed, leaned on his cane and spoke first. "With respect to your authority, Alpha, this woman arrives carrying active pursuit, unverified claims, and a child tied to disputed inheritance. At minimum, she should be confined until truth is established." Disputed inheritance. Not widow, not guest, not person. Seraphina kept her face neutral while fury climbed her throat. Another elder, a narrow-eyed woman named Tamsin, tapped one of the letters with gloved fingers. A courier from Ash Hollow delivered this at dawn. Their Alpha petitions for her immediate return under Pack Unity Accords, citing concerns she may be manipulated here. Manipulated. The word tasted like mockery after a locked gate and a burned safe house. Nikolai broke the first seal, scanned the page, then the second. His expression moved from controlled to glacial. He placed both letters flat on the table so every elder could see the crest marks. "Forgery quality is improving," he said mildly. Tamsin stiffened. "You accuse an allied Alpha of fraud? I accuse someone of stupid timing." His gaze swept the chamber. Both letters were penned by different hands, but the same ink binder, same sand dusting, same courier mark cut at the fold. One asks me to surrender my guest. The other warns she is a frostborn plant sent to poison succession. Conveniently contradictory. Varric lifted his chin. Contradiction does not erase risk. Your duty is to the pack. My duty, Nikolai said, and this time the edge in his voice made even the torches seem to quiet, is to law before panic. Guest right was invoked at my gate. It stands. He turned toward Seraphina, jaw tight, then addressed the room without looking away from her. Any insult to Seraphina under my roof will be treated as a challenge to me personally. Any attempt to confine, drug, question, or move her without consent will be treated as an attack on Wildfire Command. Silence hit hard. One of the younger counselors dropped his pen. Varric's face mottled. You would risk civil fracture for an outsider? Nikolai's pupils shifted, the predator surfacing in plain view. I would risk war before I let cowards barter a pregnant widow for temporary quiet. The word widow, spoken without pity and without contempt, landed in Seraphina like a vow. Tamsin tried once more, voice smoother. Alpha, perception matters. Seating her at your side in council implies endorsement beyond hospitality. Correct, he said. Perceive it clearly. Then he pulled out the chair at his right and waited. Seraphina's pulse beat in her ears as every eye tracked her crossing to the table. She could feel old habits clawing up, the instinct to shrink, to apologize for existing where powerful people debated her value. She did not obey them. She sat. Her back stayed straight. Her hands remained visible and still on the stone. Nikolai nodded once, almost imperceptible, and resumed command discussion as if this placement had always been the only lawful configuration. The remainder of the hearing cut through troop lines, border provisions, and intelligence reports. But the underlying dynamic had changed. When a counselor addressed a question to the room about Frostborn route maps, Serafina answered before anyone could redirect her into silence. She named 2 river crossings used by covert riders in flood season and corrected an outdated watch schedule based on what she had seen while fleeing. No one interrupted. No one called her unstable. They wrote down her words. By the time the chamber emptied, the tension in her shoulders had shifted from defensive brace to exhausted disbelief. She lingered by the carved pillar nearest the exit, watching servants gather wax seals and carry away the forged letters with tongs as evidence. Nikolai approached without crowding her. "You did well. I gave directions on roads I nearly died on. You gave us advantage." She looked up at him, really looked. The ruthlessness rumors had not lied. It lived in him like weather front and steel, ready and unsentimental. But it was not indiscriminate. It was governed, chosen. The distinction mattered more than charm ever could. "My former alpha is going to come himself next," she said quietly. "He will kneel and speak about unity and shared blood, and he will mean none of it." Nikolai's gaze darkened. "Then he can kneel on my stone and hear your answer in public." "Not my answer for you. Your answer." The wall she had not known she had built began to crumble, not in a dramatic collapse, but in careful fractures, each one widening a path toward trust she had not believed she would ever offer again. She was still afraid. She was still grieving. She still woke tasting smoke. Yet as she stood in Wildfire's council hall with stormlight fading through the high slits and the mountain keep breathing around her like a living thing, she recognized a new and unsettling fact. For the first time since the ambush, she was no longer fighting alone. The bronze doors at the end of the council level swung open hard enough to strike the wall, and Captain Riven crossed the threshold with rain on his shoulders and protocol stripped out of his face. Alpha. Envoys at the lower court under Truce White. Ash Hollow Crest. Frostborn Witness Seal. Nikolai went very still beside her. Who leads them? Riven's jaw flexed. Alpha Darius of Ash Hollow in person. He asks audience with Serafina by name. The words should have surprised her. They did not. She had warned Nikolai minutes ago, and now prediction stood in the doorway breathing mountain rain. Serafina felt the old instinct rise anyway, the one that taught her to brace for shame before she even heard the accusation. She pressed her palm to the carved pillar until the stone steadied her. Nikolai looked at her, not at his captain. "Do you want to see him?" It struck her that he could have decided without asking, and no one in this keep would have challenged him. Instead, he placed choice in her hands where it belonged. "Yes," she said. "In public." The lower court was an open rectangle of black flagstone between inner wall and great hall, ringed by torch brackets, and watched from 3 tiers of balconies. By the time Serafina descended with Nikolai at her flank, half the keep had gathered in disciplined silence. Wildfire warriors stood in dark leathers along the perimeter. Elders kept to the upper rail. The rain had thinned to a fine cold mist that silvered hair and cloaks and the edges of spearheads. Darius knelt at the center of the stones as promised, cloak spread neatly, head bowed just enough to be seen as humble from a distance. Leora stood 1 pace behind him, expression carefully sorrowful. 2 Frostborn observers waited farther back, with neutral sashes tied at the shoulder, witnesses purchased for legitimacy. Serafina recognized one of them from Kane's border escorts and tasted iron at the back of her tongue. Darius raised his eyes and performed grief with polished precision. "Serafina, daughter of our valley, we came to bring you home." Home, after a barred gate and a sentence of exile delivered under torchlight. He continued before she answered, voice pitched to Carrie. Our council acted in fear after the ambush. Fear leads to harsh decisions. We seek correction now. For unity, for your child's future, for peace between packs. Return under my protection, and we will restore your rank, your lands, and full standing. Serafina almost laughed. The offer was too complete, too sudden, too useful to everyone except her. She did not move closer. Where was this correction when I stood in rain asking for shelter? A muscle jumped in Darius's cheek. Circumstances were volatile. You mean Cain Frostborn had already reached your messengers? Murmurs rippled through the balconies. The Frostborn witness shifted his stance. Leora stepped in smoothly. No one here denies mistakes, but clinging to blame will cost more lives. You are entangled now in wildfire politics and Frostborn pressure. Come back where bonds are known. Let this mountain conflict end before it begins. Known bonds. The phrase landed like rot. They had known her all her life and traded her route anyway. Nikolai's voice cut across the courtyard, low and hard. State your legal basis, Darius. You requested audience under truce law, not theater. Darius rose from one knee with measured dignity, as if prompted by fairness rather than challenge. Pack unity accords permit reclamation of displaced members when regional stability is threatened. Serafina's presence here invites war. Her presence, Nikolai said, revealed your cooperation with men who hunted her. Darius did not deny it. He shifted strategy. Frostborn has delivered terms to every border alpha. They claim she carries a blood curse and forged succession claim through her unborn child. If Wildfire refuses mediation, they will force it. You can dismiss rumor, but rumor still mobilizes armies. There it was. The multifaceted blade. Poison reputation. Isolate target. Call coercion diplomacy. Serafina looked at the two Frostborn witnesses and saw the confidence in their stillness. This was not an appeal. It was positioning. I am standing in a court where men discuss my child as leverage and my body as jurisdiction. I am not shaking. I am not lowering my head. I remember the gate shutting and the smell of burning oil, and I remember how small I felt then, how easy it would have been to disappear if I had believed them. I do not believe them now. If I step back once, they will call it reason and ask for more until there is nothing left that is mine. She stepped forward into open torchlight. Hear me clearly. I decline reclamation. I will not return to a pack that denied sanctuary and sold my trail. I invoke my right as a free mate-bonded wolf under mountain law to choose residence and protection. Darius's mask thinned. You are speaking under influence. Serafina met his stare. I am speaking under memory. For the first time, anger cracked through his polished tone. One widow does not outweigh a border war. Nikolai moved then, not touching her, only aligning shoulder to shoulder so every watcher understood jurisdiction had already shifted. One alpha who barters widows does not define war law in my territory. The Frostborn witness finally spoke, voice bland as parchment. Lord Cain will interpret this refusal as provocation. Then Lord Cain can learn restraint, Nikolai said. The meeting ended without ceremonial closure, a breach so sharp even the elders noticed. Darius gave Serafina one last look that held no remorse at all, only calculation and a flicker of resentment that she had become harder to move than expected. As Ash Hollow and Frostborn parties withdrew under guard, Captain Riven handed Nikolai a sealed packet recovered from one of their saddlebags during routine disarmament inspection. Routine, except Riven's eyes were flint. In Nikolai's private war room, the packet yielded 3 thin sheets and a ledger strip written in cipher columns. Maeve joined them to verify ink age and handling residue. A healer pressed into intelligence because Wildfire trusted craft over titles. Serafina stood at the table while Nikolai translated line by line from old trader code into spoken threat. Payment schedules to Ash Hollow quartermasters, bribes to 2 wildfire minor vassals, courier stipends for rumor placement in market towns, cursed womb, dead mate false heir, wildfire alpha bewitched. At the bottom, 2 directives initialed with Kane's wolf mark. Force surrender through legitimacy pressure. If refusal, trigger dual front depletion and retrieve asset alive. Asset. Serafina felt suddenly cold despite the fire roaring beside them. Maeve exhaled through her nose. He does not want you dead yet. He wants you movable. Nikolai folded the sheet with surgical care, which makes him more dangerous than a man seeking clean revenge. By dusk, the keep moved on war footing without naming it war. Scouts doubled on southern ridges. Granaries were sealed. Signal fires were prepped on the eastern watch line, and still the internal pressure climbed. 2 elders requested emergency vote on her confinement. 3 households sent private petitions asking whether unborn succession would be tainted by outsider blood. Someone painted the old word cursed in ash across the stable door before dawn and fled before being seen. The insult should have gutted her. Instead, it sharpened her focus. She stood in the training gallery above the barracks and watched younger wolves run paired drills with weighted spears, counting their cadence and the gaps in command transitions. If Kane sought fracture, he would strike wherever Wildfire looked uncertain about her. The most dangerous point was no longer the mountain road. It was opinion. Nikolai found her there with 2 mugs of bitter herb tea she had begun tolerating because Maeve said it helped with smoke irritation. He set one on the rail, close enough for warmth, far enough to avoid presumption. You should be resting. She watched a pair of fighters reset stance below. Rest does not erase slander. No, but exhaustion makes it easier to doubt yourself. She turned toward him. Do you? Doubt you? His mouth flattened. No. Doubt the cost. A pause, brief and honest. I account for cost every hour. That answer hurt and steadied her at once, because it carried no performance. He was not promising effortless devotion. He was choosing with full knowledge. Attraction threaded the silence between them, no longer an accidental spark, but an accumulating pressure that changed the shape of ordinary things. The way his attention tracked her breathing when she climbed stairs. The way her senses fixed on his presence in a crowded hall before she consciously searched for him. They moved around each other with deliberate care, each respectful boundary making the pull stronger rather than weaker. I keep waiting for this bond to feel like theft from my past, and sometimes guilt still hits without warning when I touch my ring. I loved the man I buried. I will not rewrite that to make anyone comfortable. Yet grief is not a shrine that demands I die beside it. Nikolai does not ask me to choose amnesia. He asks me to choose agency. That is why I am afraid of wanting him, because wanting him means admitting I still have a future. A runner arrived mid-afternoon carrying news from the southern markets. Kane's heralds were announcing a formal claim at the next Moon Tribunal, accusing Serafina of espionage, air fraud, and sacrilege through false mate bond manipulation. Witnesses had been purchased. A ritual seer from Frostborn's allied enclave had agreed to testify. Refusal to appear, by tribunal custom, would be interpreted as confession. Nikolai read the report once, then passed it to her. He is moving faster than expected. He wants decision under ritual pressure before your vassals settle. He wants me cornered between law and defense. She tapped the line naming tribunal location, Neutral Stone Amphitheater on the border plateau, one of the oldest legal sites in Northern Territories. If we ignore this, he controls the story. If we attend without proof, he controls the seer. Either way, he bleeds you. Nikolai's gaze held hers. I would rather lose narrative than lose you. Do not say that again. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Why? Because I am not a relic to hide in a vault while men debate me. I ran enough roads for one lifetime. The rebuke hung between them, then settled into something steadier. Respect, sharpened by conflict. That night the mountain sky cleared for the first time in days. Moonlight poured over the inner terraces and turned the keep's dark stone pale at the edges, as if frost had traced every line. Sleep would not come, so Serafina followed the quiet corridor to the old archive gallery above the temple court, a place of dry parchment, cedar shelves, and windows cut narrow against winter wind. She found Nikolai there alone, coat off, reading a brittle war chronicle with one hand braced against the table as if history itself might bolt. He looked up but did not ask why she was awake. She was grateful. For several minutes they stood at opposite ends of the long table in companionable silence. Then Serafina said, "Tell me one thing about you no counselor knows." He considered, then closed the chronicle. "When I was younger, I believed control meant never needing anyone. I built a reign around that idea. It kept the territory intact. It also kept me unreachable." Moonlight caught the pale streak at his temple. She wondered which battle had etched it there, and what it had cost him afterward. "My turn," she said softly. "I used to sing while grinding herbs. Loudly. Badly. My husband claimed it improved medicine through intimidation." The corner of Nikolai's mouth lifted. "I would like to hear that theory tested." A small laugh escaped her, this one easier than the first storm night crack in fear. The laugh faded, and the quiet deepened into something tender enough to be dangerous. She touched the ring on her finger, then met his eyes. "I need you to understand this clearly. I can step toward you and still love who I lost. If that is a problem, tell me now." Nikolai came around the table slowly, each pace visible, each choice declared. He stopped at her nod. "It is not a problem," he said. "It is truth. I do not compete with your dead. I stand with your living." The words undid her more thoroughly than any vow could have. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. Heat traveled through her palm into her wrist. Not a violent surge this time, but a steady current that settled her breathing. When the child shifted, strong and unmistakable, she startled, then smiled despite herself. "He approves of dramatic timing." Nikolai's expression changed, wonder laid bare for one unguarded second. "May I?" She guided his hand to the curve of her belly. The movement beneath her skin came again, a rolling press against his broad palm. Nikolai shut his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, the feral hardness was gone, replaced by reverence so raw she had to look away to keep from crying. No one spoke for a while. The archive air smelled of cedar and ink and moon-chilled stone. Somewhere below, temple bells marked the late watch. The first scream broke the stillness like snapped wire. It came from the lower court, then another, then the unmistakable clang of alarm iron. Nikolai moved instantly, pulling his hand back and reaching for the short blade on the shelf where he had set it out of habit while reading. Serafina was already at the gallery door. "Stay behind me," he said. "Not tonight." They hit the stair at a run, boots striking worn steps in hard rhythm. Smoke met them on the second landing, thin but acrid, not hearth smoke, lamp oil accelerated with resin. In the temple court below, two cloaked figures had breached the inner wall through a maintenance culvert and were forcing novices and attendants toward the center fountain, while a third scattered fire pellets at door frames to block exits. Not an army strike. A targeted panic operation. One attacker saw Serafina and shouted, "Asset located." Rage cut through her fear with crystalline clarity. She grabbed a fallen staff from the stair foot and drove it into the nearest assailant's wrist, sending his hooked restraint chain skittering across stone. Nikolai collided with the second man in a blur of controlled brutality, half-shifted claws flashing as he disarmed and pinned him against a pillar before the attacker could trigger the satchel at his hip. The third fled toward the east arch, but Captain Riven and two guards intercepted, tackling him to the ground. Bells kept ringing. Smoke thickened along the ceiling beams. Servants hauled water buckets in a chain, while Maeve shepherded shaking novices out through the west passage. Seraphina bent over the man she had disarmed and ripped his hood back. Frostborn tattoo at the neck, courier scars on the fingers, a bite of silver wire sewn inside his collar to break if captured. Not raiders, operatives. Nikolai hauled his own captive upright by the front of his cloak. "Who sent you?" The man smiled through split lip and ash. "You already know." Riven cut open the satchel and swore under his breath. Inside lay 3 folded edicts bearing counterfeit wildfire seals, each ordering emergency transfer of Seraphina to border custody by council authority. If they had grabbed her in smoke and confusion, they could have walked through half the keep with paperwork ready. Nikolai's gaze went lethal. "Take them to iron cells. Separate. Gag the one with wire." As guards dragged the infiltrators away, a messenger sprinted into the court and skidded to a stop, chest heaving. Southern Ridge fires lit in sequence, not ours. Frostborn banners at the lower pass and Ash Hollow outriders massing North Fork. They are not attacking yet. They are waiting. "For what?" Seraphina asked, though she already knew. The messenger swallowed. "For your surrender order at Moonrise. Their herald says if Wildfire refuses, both fronts advance before dawn." Around them, water hissed on burning oil. Bells continued to toll. Smoke curled through moonlight in ragged strands. Nikolai turned to Seraphina, ash streaking his jaw, eyes gone hard amber. Cain had moved from rumor to seizure to siege in a single night, and the mountain had run out of time. Cain had moved from rumor to seizure to siege in a single night, and the mountain had run out of time. Seraphina stood in the smoke-hazed temple court while alarm bells hammered the dark, and she saw the crux with painful clarity. If she vanished into hiding, Cain would call it guilt and march anyway. If Wildfire surrendered her, every border law became a weapon against the next widow. If she stood in open judgment, she might die, but the lie would have nowhere left to hide. Nikolai read the decision in her face before she spoke. "No," he said, voice rough with controlled fury. "I will not put you on that stone in front of him." "You will not put me there," she answered. "I will go." Riven glanced between them, ash streaked across his brow. "Alpha, Southern Pass reports confirm Frostborn advance lines are waiting for Moonrise signal." Maeve came up from the lower arch with a satchel of herbs and silver thread. "Then we choose the field they expect least. Tribunal ground, witness law. If Cain attacks there, he strips his own immunity." Nikolai's jaw flexed hard enough to show the scar at his cheek. "He will bring paid seers and bought testimony." Seraphina reached into the torn inner lining of her sleeve and drew out a narrow oilskin packet she had taken from the infiltrator's satchel while Riven searched restraints. "Then he can explain this under Goddess Fire." Riven took one look and swore softly. "Courier ledger." "I know Trader Cipher," Seraphina said. "My husband taught me when we moved grain contracts. I copied 3 columns before the alarms hit: dates, payments, route marks, Ash Hollow sign-offs." Nikolai stared at her for one long beat, anger and fear and fierce pride crossing his expression in quick succession. "You planned this already." "I survived this already," she said. "Different road, same men." He stepped close enough that she could feel heat from his skin through damp fabric, but he did not touch her until she nodded. When his hand settled at the back of her neck, steady and warm, the shaking in her legs eased. "If we do this," he said, each word deliberate, "you do not stand alone for one breath. You stay within my line. You give one command and I pull you out. Law be damned." She held his gaze. "If I command stay?" He exhaled sharply through his nose. A near growl turned into discipline. "Then I stay." Moon Tribunal sat on a wind-cut plateau where 3 territories met. An amphitheater of ancient stone opened to the sky, ringed with carved pillars blackened by centuries of oath fire. By the time Wildfire's escort arrived, torches already burned in concentric circles and banners snapped in the high, cold air. Frostborn lined the northern steps in iron-gray armor. Ash Hollow stood to the east, cloaks neat, faces guarded. Neutral packs crowded the upper tiers for witness rights. No one pretended this was routine law. Seraphina walked between Nikolai and Maeve with her spine straight, one hand over her belly, the other gripping the plain knife that had once lived in her husband's palm. The child shifted once, strong and insistent, and awareness prickled along her spine with a strange, focused calm. Cain Frostborn waited at the central stone in a black war coat, broad and immaculate, his smile thin as winter light. Amber bled into his irises when he saw her. "There she is," he called, carrying easily to the tiers. "The grieving widow turned mountain weapon." Darius stood 2 steps behind him, with Leora at his side, and an expression of solemn concern so polished it looked like prayer. Seraphina felt no shock, only the dull confirmation of what she had already known. The tribunal herald struck iron staff to stone 3 times. Claims will be spoken under moon witness. Falsehood proven by fire receives sanction. Cain inclined his head toward the herald, then addressed the crowd. "I bring charges of espionage, air fraud, and sacrilege. This woman entered Wildfire as an asset sent to destabilize succession. Her unborn child is tied to a cursed line intended to fracture northern law." Murmurs rolled through the tiers. Ash Hollow kept its eyes down. Nikolai stepped forward, but Seraphina caught his sleeve. "Let him spend his rope," she whispered. Cain continued, voice warm with practiced authority. "I further submit that Alpha Nikolai Wildfire has been compromised through false bond manipulation. For the stability of all packs, I request immediate transfer of custody to neutral holding." "Denied," Nikolai said flatly. The herald raised a hand. "Evidence first. The accuser calls witness." A seer in frost-white robes came to the stone, palms marked with ritual ash. Seraphina recognized the woman from market circuits, not frostborn by blood but loyal to whoever paid temple dues fastest. Cain offered a sealed purse in full view. The seer did not touch it. A page stepped in and accepted on her behalf. Legal, if ugly. The seer faced Seraphina and closed her eyes. "Your scent reads split loyalty, buried rage, unstable gift. You carry death in your line." A rustle of disquiet moved through Wildfire ranks. Varric, on the high tier with Tamsin, leaned forward like a man deciding which side of history would cost him least. Seraphina felt the old weight pressing down, the familiar script where others named her, and she disappeared inside their words. Then she looked at the tribunal fire bowl, where silver flame burned clear despite the wind, and the numbness she had carried for months cracked apart. "I challenge witness," she said. The herald blinked. "On what grounds?" "Corruption and omission." She stepped to the central ring before anyone could block her and held up the oilskin packet. "I submit Cain Frostborn's courier ledger, recovered from his operatives inside Wildfire, keep tonight. Cipher columns cross-reference Ash Hollow quartermasters and rumor payments to market criers. Includes transfer orders for my seizure." Riven moved quickly, taking the packet to the herald and then the neutral scribes. Pages unfolded, eyes widened. One scribe called for additional lamps. Cain laughed, too loud. "Forgery. Desperation in a stolen sleeve." Seraphina lifted her chin. "Then test me." The crowd quieted. "Moonfire accepts memory witness by consent," she said, voice carrying now. "I give mine." Nikolai's head snapped toward her. "Seraphina." She did not look away from the herald. "Record this. I consent to seer link under tribunal law." The seer hesitated for the first time. Memory witness was dangerous even when voluntary, because lies burned both ways. "You understand the cost?" "Yes." Nikolai came to her side, every line of him taut as drawn wire. You do not owe them your mind. I owe myself the truth, spoken where they cannot bury it. His throat worked once. Then he nodded, slow and grim. I stand as anchor. The ritual circle was drawn in salt and moon water around the central stone. Serafina knelt inside it with the seer opposite and Nikolai just beyond the line, one hand extended until she took it. The seer pressed ash to Serafina's brow and spoke the invocation. Silver fire rose, thin at first, then bright enough to carve hard shadows across every face in the amphitheater. The first memory hit like plunging into frozen water. Border Road at dusk. Wheels jolt, her husband laughing at some small, bad joke about weather. Then riders from Treeline, disciplined, fast, wearing no crest but moving in frostborn formation, steel, shouts. Her husband's hand shoving her down behind the cart, command torn out of him. Run. The fire flared higher. Gasps broke from the tears as images spilled outward in shifting light. The abandoned cabin, oil at the door, flames taking wood in one hungry breath, her husband's signet nailed to char. Then a second thread surfaced, one Serafina had barely processed while living it. Darius's quartermaster in a stable yard, passing a sealed route map to a frostborn courier for a heavy purse. Leora's bracelet glinting in the background as she watched and turned away. Darius shouted, "Fabrication!" The silver flame whipped toward him and turned blue-white at the edges, a tribunal sign of contested falsehood. Neutral witnesses surged to their feet, voices rising. Cain stepped forward, fury stripping polish from his face. End this right. The herald struck staff again. Hold your place. Cain did not. He ripped free of his own guards and lunged for the circle with claws breaking through human hands mid-stride. Chaos detonated across the tiers as frostborn captains shouted commands, and Ash Hollow scattered to the outer steps. Serafina rose inside the circle, still linked to fire, and saw Nikolai moving to intercept. Cain was faster on the first burst, half-shifted mass aimed straight through her anchor. Fear hit, sharp and bright, but it did not hollow her. It focused her. No one will choose my fate again. She stepped between them. For one suspended heartbeat, every sound seemed to drop away, except the pounding of blood and the high, clear ring of moonfire. Heat pulsed beneath her skin, then surged outward from the place she guarded with both hands. Silver light erupted in a curved ward around her body and womb, not fragile, not flickering, but dense as hammered metal. Cain hit it at full charge. The impact cracked like thunder. His forelegs slammed down, pinned to stone by luminous bands that locked at the joint. He snarled and thrashed, jaw snapping inches from the barrier. Nikolai came through the smoke in partial wolf form, runes along his arms blazing gold, fangs bared, eyes gone feral with controlled wrath. He drove Cain back with a shoulder strike that shattered one tribunal brazier and sent sparks across wet stone. Cain twisted free of one silver bind, launched again, and Nikolai met him mid-lunge, claw to claw, forcing him toward the central judgment slab where old law stripped blood-feud protections once violence began under witness. Around them, Riven and Wildfire guard units slammed a shield wall across the lower steps while Frostborn captains hesitated, reading the crowd and the tribunal signs. Neutral packs were shouting now, not in panic, but in legal cadence. Witnessed assault. Sanction applies. No immunity. Cain staggered, regained footing, and spat blood and contempt at Serafina. You are only useful as breeding stock. She stepped to the edge of the slab, silver ward still humming around her like moonlit steel. I was never your prey, and I am not your peace treaty. His lip curled. You think this makes you queen? I think this ends you. She looked at him, then at the witnesses. Confess the ambush. Cain laughed, wet and broken-edged. Make me. Nikolai did. He seized Cain by the throat and drove him down to one knee on tribunal stone. For a fraction of a second, Cain clawed at Nikolai's wrist, still fighting, still refusing. Then Nikolai's grip tightened with a final sanctioned strike. Bone gave with a sharp crack. Cain went still. Silence dropped hard over the amphitheater. Wind and fire the only sounds left. The herald's voice shook, but carried. Cain Frostborn is dead under witness sanction. Claims collapse. Command succession disputed pending surrender terms. 3 Frostborn captains looked to one another, then to Cain's body, then to the tears of neutral witnesses, and the silver fire still burning around Seraphina. The oldest among them stepped forward, dropped his sword, and knelt. "We surrender arms under tribunal law," he said hoarsely. "Name terms." Riven glanced at Nikolai, then at Seraphina. She answered before either man could. "Executions are commuted. You will disarm, dissolve raiding companies, and swear binding oaths to neutral wardens for 1 full turning year. Break it, and sanction returns without appeal." Shock flickered across faces, then wary relief. The captain bowed his head. "We accept." Darius tried to slip toward the eastern stair in the confusion. Leora caught his sleeve too late. Maeve pointed him out with clinical precision, and wildfire guards intercepted both. Darius shouted about sovereign rights until the herald read out the memory witness findings and stripped Ash Hollow's claim standing on the spot pending summit judgment. When the tribunal finally broke, dawn had started to pale the eastern ridge. Seraphina's knees shook as adrenaline ebbed, and this time she did not hide it. Nikolai came to her slowly, hands open, waiting. She leaned into him with a small, exhausted sound and felt his arms close around her, careful of her belly, fierce around everything else. He rested his forehead against hers. "You set the field on fire and called it law." She huffed a laugh that came out half-sob. "Was it very bad form?" "Catastrophic," he murmured. "I am deeply impressed." They returned to Wildfire through morning fog and ringing quiet. No one cheered. Warriors saluted with fists to heart as she passed, heads bowed not in pity but in recognition. In the Moon Temple, where white stone held the night's chill and incense drifted like pale smoke beneath carved beams, Nikolai dismissed everyone except Maeve, who checked Seraphina and the child with brisk competence, and then withdrew, closing the heavy doors behind her. The temple settled into silence. Seraphina stood before the altar basin with her husband's old ring turning slowly against her thumb. She had not removed it through grief, through flight, through siege. Now she slid it free, pressed it to her lips, and laid it beside a single candle, not erased, honored, released. When she turned, Nikolai was waiting at a respectful distance, as if crossing this room without permission would be a trespass. "I will ask plainly," he said, voice unsteady for the first time since she had known him. "May I mark you as my mate under temple witness?" She looked at him, at the man who had counted her breaths on a storm-soaked floor, moved war maps to stone so she could sleep, bared his authority to shield her without trying to own her, and trusted her choice even when it terrified him. "Yes." He swallowed hard, then asked again, formal and clear. "Seraphina, do you consent to my claiming bite and bond vow?" "Yes," she whispered, stepping closer. A third time, his hands trembling now as he reached for her. "Do you choose me freely, with full right to refuse?" She set her palms to his face and held his gaze. "I choose you." Golden threads kindled at their wrists the instant the words left her mouth. Thin lines of light spiraling upward along skin. Nikolai exhaled like a man who had been bracing for impact and found grace instead. He bent slowly, giving her every chance to pull back, and brushed his mouth to the junction of her neck and shoulder. The first touch was almost reverent. The bite that followed was sharp enough to pull a cry from her throat, pain bright and immediate, then changing as warmth flooded out from the mark in widening rings. Not numbness, not surrender. transformation. The ache uncoiled into a deep, resonant pull that settled under her ribs and answered something ancient there. Her knees softened. Nikolai caught her, one arm around her waist, the other splayed protective over the life they guarded. Mine, he whispered against her skin, voice raw. Serafina drew him closer by the back of his neck, breath unsteady, and bared her own teeth over his pulse point. Yours, she answered, then bit. He shuddered hard at the contact, a low sound breaking from him as gold flared brighter around their throats like linked collars of light. She tasted salt and heat and oath. When she released, she pressed her forehead to his and spoke the final word into the small space between them. Mate. The bond completed in a rush of luminous stillness. Not a storm this time, but a vast calm opening between their minds, clear as moonlit water. She felt him in layered impressions that were more than thought. Iron control threaded with devotion, old loneliness giving way to astonished relief, ferocity turned outward from her instead of inward against himself. From her side he received grief without shame, stubborn hope, and a love already forming with roots that did not deny the past. No one will choose my fate again, she sent across the new link, the words both spoken and felt. He answered against her mouth, breath warm, vow steady. Then choose me, and I will spend every life proving worthy. She kissed him once, slow and certain, then rested with him on the temple steps, wrapped in each other's arms while the bond light settled from blaze to steady glow beneath their skin. For a long while they said nothing. Breath matched breath. Heartbeat matched heartbeat. When the child rolled between them, Nikolai laughed quietly into her hair and covered her hand with his over the curve of her belly. By noon, summit delegates filled Wildfire's Great Hall under triple witness seal. Neutral wardens from 3 territories sat at the central table. Frostborn captains stood unarmed behind them. Darius and Leora were brought in under guard, stripped of ceremonial cloaks. Varric and Tamsin sat rigid along the side bench, summoned as Wildfire Council witnesses after their attempt to confine her. Serafina entered beside Nikolai with the fresh mark visible at her shoulder, no attempt to hide it. Murmurs rippled and then stilled. The herald read findings first. Kane's sanctioned death, proven ambush conspiracy, illegal seizure orders, Ash Hollow route trafficking, witness corruption. Then terms. Frostborn Border Command was dissolved, and lands redistributed under neutral wardens for 1 year and 1 day. Their surrendered captains would retain life and civil rights under oath monitoring, as promised publicly by Serafina at tribunal. Ash Hollow lost tribunal standing for trafficking a member's location under active threat, pending full legal rehabilitation process that would take years, not favors. Darius was removed as Alpha by his own deputy under external oversight. Leora was barred from council function and assigned restitution service to displaced households. Then Serafina stood to present the final reform clause she had written with Maeve and Riven before dawn. Border law is amended, she said, voice carrying through the hall's carved rafters, to guarantee sanctuary passage for widows, unshifted mates, and unborn heirs regardless of pact dispute status. Any Alpha who denies emergency shelter for political trade forfeits tribunal protections in cross-territory claims. Silence held for 1 beat, then neutral wardens struck staff to stone in approval cadence. 1 by 1, signatures followed. Afterward, in the outer court, workers began hanging new tablets with the sanctuary statute while displaced families from southern routes arrived under Wildfire escort. Serafina moved among them with Maeve, assigning quarters, marking supply needs, listening to stories that sounded too much like her own, and still choosing not to look away. Riven oversaw disarmament registries with unforgiving precision, and, when she thanked him, ducked his head as if embarrassed by the softness of it. On the second full moon after tribunal, The public claiming ceremony filled the mountain terraces with firelight and winter bloom garlands. Snow dusted the high battlements, bright under a clean sky. Wolves gathered in layered rings below, their breath rising white in the cold. Seraphina wore wildfire crimson over silver, her belly round and proud, one hand anchored at its curve as she climbed the final steps to the moon dais with Nikolai beside her. Before the vows were sealed, the crowd parted at the lower stair. Darius, no longer cloaked as Alpha, was escorted forward under warden guard, humbled at last by consequence rather than choice. He dropped to one knee, voice frayed. "Seraphina, come home, let us repair what was broken." The old plea, stripped of power and still too late. She looked down at him, then over the gathered nations who had watched her hunted, accused, and chosen. When she spoke, her tone was calm enough to carry farther than shouting ever could. "I am home." She turned, placed her hand in Nikolai's, and faced the altar fire. Gold warmed through their bond marks in a steady pulse. Around them, wildfire bowed as one. Not to possession, to covenant. Nikolai lifted her joined hand for all to witness. "Seraphina Wildfire," he said, voice rough with reverence, "co-ruler by law, my equal by choice, my mate in this life and every life after." She met his eyes, felt the calm, luminous link between them settle deeper, and answered, "Nikolai Wildfire, chosen and choosing. Mine. Yours. Mate." The bells rang over Mountain Stone, clear and bright. In the crowd below, Maeve smiled openly. Riven finally allowed himself a grin, and even Varric and Tamsin bowed their heads to the law they had resisted and now served. Frostborn wardens stood watch without chains. Sanctuary caravans waited at the lower gates for her new network routes at first light. Peace was not a fragile hope anymore. It was built, signed, defended. When Nikolai drew her into his arms beneath the moon, Seraphina felt no shadow of bargaining left in her body, only the fierce, quiet certainty of being seen and safe and fully her own. The child shifted between them, strong as a promise, while the mountain answered with 100 voices rising in welcome.